Hey there, folks. Welcome to Head, Heart, and Hustle, the podcast for creatives. I'm Alan Plummer, your host, and as always, thank you for listening. If you're new to the podcast, Head, Heart, and Hustle is designed to give you insights and encouragement from real working creatives. Anyone with a side hustle or creative outlet can feel isolated from their friends, their family, and other people around them who just don't get their passion. That's why this podcast exists, to help you feel motivated, learn, and just get a nice pick-me-up of creative energy from other people like yourself. Now, every episode, I interview a creative individual who doesn't just pretend to be creative. They've rolled up their sleeves and are producing great things because they need to. They know that being creative is part of who they are. Does that sound familiar? Good, then you're in the right place. Now, today I'm actually breaking the rules a little bit. I'm not interviewing one creative individual, but two. We're going to be speaking with the two gentlemen that are responsible for the music for the podcast, John Piljer and Matt Taddei, better known as the band Starch to Sugar. They are based out of the suburbs of Philadelphia. I've known these guys for a couple years. And when I told them I was starting the podcast, they absolutely volunteered not only to be interviewed, but to write some intro music for me. So I was absolutely, of course, was happy to take them up on that. I loved their stuff, and so was thrilled that they wanted to be a part of this little project. So yeah, it's interesting. It's the three of us sat down in John's studio in his house and had a nice conversation. It's interesting to kind of hear their process, and it's fun for me as a writer.
Thank you both for
you guys compliment
doing this.
other,
Really appreciate it,
like
John and Matt.
So
I will say as we dive in, this is actually a first for me and for the podcast in doing this live. Everything else has been remote conversations, so this is really awesome. Just for the sake of listeners, I'll describe really quickly. So we're actually in John's house in his recording studio, which is pretty impressive to kind of see. It's pretty neat with your guitars and your amps and your drum sets and your editing equipment and your keyboard and being surrounded by mics.
Which we couldn't get to work.
Exactly. It's fine. It's all right. Technology is a wonderful thing, right? But yeah, this is awesome. This is really exciting, really fun to do. So I could easily introduce the two of you. We've known each other for a couple years now through work, but before we kind of dive into some of the fun stuff, why don't I start by asking you guys to just introduce yourselves and tell folks who you are and what you do.
Yeah, you can go. John?
I'm John Piljer. I play in a band called Starch to Sugar with my friend Matt. Been interested in music all my life, but just in the past few years, kind of got this project started, and it's really been a fantastic thing.
Hi, I'm Matt Taddei, pronounced Taddei in Italian. I go by both, but I met John in Starch to Sugar with John. We met probably through mutual friends, how many years ago now? 10, 15?
Yeah, maybe like 8 to 10.
8 to 10.
Yeah. We had all these mutual friends who kind of seemed to want to get us together, but we never met till years later.
Yeah.
Got it.
Also, coincidentally, work at the same company
Yep.
as you. Well,
That's
so.
me. Yes. Very large company. It's it's a big high school in many ways. Yeah, exactly. So you guys have known each other for years. How long have you been playing together? When did you guys start?
Around 2010, I think.
Yeah.
So it's a good 6 years then.
Yeah.
So you guys have done, right? You write your own stuff. You record your own stuff. I actually have a couple of your albums. So a couple questions come to mind really quickly. One is a little bit about your childhoods and how you ended up in music. John, you said you had always been really interested in music, but then really kind of started, it sounds seriously, I guess, a couple years ago. How did you kind of gravitate towards music? How did you end up in that space?
Well, my mom used to say I learned to read from reading record labels. Which I think was actually true. I thought it was a joke at the time.
Right.
But she used to, I have two older sisters, and, there was a time they were in school, and I was just there with my mom, and she would, take me out doing shopping or whatever. If I was good, I'd get a record at the end of the day.
Nice.
And she said I was always good.
Some kids want to be asking for music. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And what kind of music?
I was into, pop music at the time. Yep. Elton John was one of the first records I remember getting in my first concert.
Right.
I was 6.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my aunt took me, and I started playing guitar around 5.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's really cool. And your parents were encouraging of that, supportive and
Totally.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, and then
That's cool.
continue to play, and I was in some bands, and I was always like most interested in recording. That was my favorite thing.
Okay.
And I think Matt and I sort of connected about that because we had sort of a similar path there.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, it's funny. I think people end up in music in different spaces. Some people want to be on stage. Some people want to write. Some people want to, experiment and do the recording. So that's kind of neat because you hear so often this kind of assumption, or at least for me, right, as a writer and not being a musician, that assumption that you learn to play music so you can perform in front of other people and be out and do that. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, I like that part of it
Yeah.
too, but
I think, and we were talking before, I think John and I, growing up in the 70s and 80s, the tinkering aspect of recording.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier around this wonderful technology now,
Yeah.
solid state technology and digital
Yeah.
recording, and when your kids bouncing tracks on tapes, all that kind of fun stuff. So
Right.
I think that's definitely part of it. The musicianship is part of it, but then the whole mad scientist part of recording, especially with analog technology, is something that we both enjoyed as kids.
yeah,
So,
and we both did kind of a similar thing where like I would get 2 tape decks and record something in one, and then play that back and record something. It would wind up being this big hiss
yeah.
fest, basically, from all the tape noise. But you did something like that too, right?
Sure. Yeah, you bounce tracks down,
Right.
Manually. Yeah, fun stuff.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, and it is kind of amazing how just technology has changed all this. So so we're sitting here, John, in your studio, essentially recording this stuff on a great Mac, and you're alluding back to kind of when we were kids, and it was very different. I talk to a lot of different people. Regardless of what they do creatively, there seems to be this opening of opportunities that we just didn't have when we were kids, right? It's
Sure.
I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I started writing when I was younger, there was this mindset of you had to go through mainstream media, you had to write the great American novel, right? That's part of the reason I moved to New York after college.
Yeah.
Opportunities are really different now. I think if I were coming out of college now and I were writing, I wouldn't have necessarily made the same choices I did then. So it's fascinating in the way kind of that evolution has really leveled the landscape or the playing field in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, I remember when I was a kid in high school bands, we always talked about getting a record deal.
Right.
Like that was analogous to kids that play football. That was the NFL contract, right?
Right.
Like, and we all dreamed of how did we do that, and yeah. So now it's just like, I guess, kids and anybody can just share it with the world, right?
Yep.
Very quickly and
Yep.
almost,
And sometimes you actually can make more profits that way.
Yeah.
Because it's when you take out the record labels or the publishers or anything else like that take the majority of the profits, if there are any, right? Then it kind of comes back. So very cool. So all right, so John mentioned his first concert. I have to ask you, Matt, what was your first concert?
I was 14.
Okay.
It was Rush,
Nice.
the Hold Your Fire tour.
Okay.
So I'm a drummer. When I was a little kid, there wasn't a time when I wasn't playing the drums. So in diapers, playing pots and pans with spoons. God bless my parents. They bought me an animal from the Muppets
Okay.
drum set.
All
I
right.
must have been probably, I was definitely single digits.
Yep.
But they were the parents that let their kid play the drums.
Yeah.
And I'm forever grateful
That's
to
awesome.
them. They could have pushed me toward a quieter instrument,
Right.
but I think they recognized that that's just who I am. I'm a drummer.
Yeah.
And they kind of accepted it.
Embrace that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then growing up, Irish folk music, Clancy Brothers.
Yep.
My family was really involved in Irish dance culture, so lots of Céilís and Irish dance events, so lots of Irish music. But then my brother got me into progressive rock as a teenager, so Rush, Yes, etc.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah.
And without delving too deeply into it, you and I were having a conversation before we started about our kids, and both of our kids are certainly creative kids, but in a different way, right? I think both your kids and mine are pretty big in artists, visual artists, drawing and everything else. I don't know about you, but it definitely feels like the creative impulses that we have as adults influence how we parent our kids, and kind of embraces that a little bit. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And they watch, and if their parents aren't, I tend to think that if I can tell my daughter, for example, all day to pursue her craft
Right.
of art.
Yeah.
But if she's watching me,
Yeah.
and she knows that's why I love coming over here with John and playing,
Right.
because she knows that Dad goes to play music,
Right.
and I like to think that she's absorbing that.
Yeah.
Because if I just tell her to do it without doing it myself,
Yeah.
I assume that she's gonna internalize that. So.
Right. So that's your advice. I mean, because I struggle with that too. Is right. Like Marcus, practice is a 4-letter word in our house, and he hates that. But man, will he do it? And I struggle with the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, definitely, I think is part of that walking the walk. To your point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Plus, it's good for mental health.
It totally is. Totally is. So, how did you guys find your creative voice? Because I think in some ways there's starting out and kind of learning music and playing with the tape decks and everything else, and listening to all different kinds of music and being influenced by different kinds of music. I think it's very different when you actually start creating and writing your own stuff. Right? I went through that as a writer of trying to figure out what types of things I wanted to write, what genres. There was a little bit of exploration there in terms of characters and what I wanted to say. I'm sure you guys had some musical things as well. How did that path look like for you guys, or how does that work out when you guys are writing music and thinking of what you write versus the types of music you enjoy?
I remember thinking I didn't really want to be a cover band, which was something, if you're doing a live, that seems to be a good way to make money, actually.
Right.
That you could be a cover band. And, I played in several bands when I was young. One was a cover band, one was not.
Okay.
And I wanted this project with Matt to be our own songs. So as far as finding the voice, I don't know. We just kind of stumbled along until we found it, I guess. Matt writes all the time, lyrics, poems.
Okay.
And I'm more on the musical spectrum, so I get musical ideas and then I put those down.
So you balance each other out then pretty well, it sounds like.
I feel like we did.
I think so too, and it's fun too. If John will have a musical idea, it's kind of fun. I like to write to deadline.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll write music and I'll try to fit lyrics to it, like Inception, the song Inception, and then I remember sitting down. John had it. That was a full blossomed concept musically in John's mind as I see it, and I just sat down on the couch and just
wrote
tried
it
to
in half an hour.
Yeah, just pounded
That's awesome.
it out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think agreeing with John, when I was a kid, high school, college, played in some working bands. Nobody wants to hear originals at parties, at cocktail parties.
Right.
They want to hear Moonlight in Vermont. Okay, I'll play you Moonlight in Vermont.
Yeah.
I'll play Brown Eyed Girl.
Yep.
Not disparaging those songs, but yeah.
Sure.
But I think at this point in our life, yeah, we want to express our own voice, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, with original music.
And it sounds like it's a lot more fulfilling for the two of you when you're able to kind of do your own stuff.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, for sure. It's
we did do a couple covers. We did one that we put out was the Christmas, last Christmas.
Okay. Yeah.
We did a cover as requested by our fans.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I love other people's music, I feel like I don't really want to imitate
Yep.
anyone else and
Yep.
just kind of want to put something out there.
So is there a part of your process when you hear something, do you ever take snippets of something or hear something and say, oh, I really like that, I'd like to experiment with that or try something like that? Or do you think it's subconscious?
I think it's subconscious, but it was interesting when we put out our little EP and everyone came with different interpretations of, influences they thought were there, which
Yep.
they probably were.
Yeah.
And it was funny because people that I've known through all different phases of my life, they would go back to things that we were listening to together at the time, which was funny. And some of them I hadn't thought of really at all.
So people bring almost this personal connection to it, and so it's as much about their, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's almost as much about their connections with you and those shared memories with you guys as it is the music themselves.
I think so. That's how it worked out for me.
Yeah, I would agree. And obviously we're like hobby level band.
Right.
So our fans are our friends.
Right.
That's what I love.
Yep.
I think being middle-aged guys and doing this together, we can relax.
Yep.
We're not trying to we want nothing more of this hobby than to enjoy it and to share it with people that know us very well.
Yeah.
There's no aspiration beyond that.
Okay.
When I was a kid, sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to get famous and be, personally, I wanted to be like world famous drummer. I wanted kids to have me on their poster. I wanted to get a contract from Tama or ProMark. But now it's like, oh, it's nice. We can ease into it and just enjoy this as a hobby. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I'm really glad that you said that, because one of the questions I always ask everybody is how do you define creative success? And it sounds like you really just kind of described that for you. And I'm going to go out on a limb, maybe, John, and assume that that's kind of the same ballpark for you as well.
Definitely, yeah. Actually, fame is less of, it's almost like a detractor now. It's not something that I'm interested in.
Right.
So it's more just about the work, and then sharing with people has been wonderful.
Yeah. And it's funny, I talk to, the more and more of these conversations I have, the more and more it feels like that's a theme that comes up as creative individuals get older. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but it does feel like, right, when you're a teenager and you're young, you get this mindset of success, and a lot of times it's influenced by mainstream media and what you see on TV and radio.
Yeah.
But then as we get older and, dare I say, wiser, we start to realize that I think there's success and happiness can kind of come from the actual process itself and just the act of creating, which isn't always apparent when we're young, I think.
Oh, definitely. There's one of my favorite artists is named April Birch.
Mm-hmm.
She's a genius fiddler, violinist, and also dancer.
Right.
We saw her right down here at Steel City in Phoenixville.
Yep.
And then we saw her at Landhaven, a little B&B. She's famous by any standard, within that community at least.
Right.
But fame is not a success factor for her, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
She'd be practicing her craft alone somewhere. And fame just came to her, I think, not as an accident, but through hard work.
It's almost like the icing on the cake. It's not the justification for doing it.
Exactly,
Yep.
and you can go, and she's, I'm just using her as an illustration, that you can go and see this world-class musician and be 4 feet away from her, and then talk to her and her band as people, just to say, fame can kind of deter that.
Yeah.
I would imagine. So, but I think when I was a kid, I thought only good musicians got famous. I didn't realize that there's a marketing machine, there is huge infrastructure, PR, luck, also hard work, obviously.
Yep.
But most of the musicians in the world are anonymous.
And there's tons of talented musicians and writers and actors who are anonymous, because they're almost aren't anointed, for lack of a better word, right? I mean, there has to be a certain kind of sellability to you as an artist to kind of get picked up on that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like we were thinking before there was the record industry and recording, people just made their own music. So, why shouldn't we do the same?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just for us and a small group of friends.
Yeah. So that said, tell me a little bit about your process. How do you guys, so you talked a little bit about how you guys write music. Tell me about how you record and how you kind of balance that out a little bit, and how you guys work together.
Well, it was kind of, we had defined ourselves through the process, I guess, because we hadn't really done it together before. So, at first, we had to adapt to new technology because we were used to, like I said about the cassettes,
putting
or a
boxes
little
next to each other.
4-track recorder.
Yep.
We knew that, and it was kind of intimidating. One of my sisters, Susie, gave me an old MacBook that she had that had GarageBand.
Okay.
And it was pretty old and wasn't functioning that well, but at least I got to learn what the technology was. Mm-hmm. And then I actually got a Mac, and then I found it wasn't, despite today's technical difficulties, wasn't as hard to learn as I thought it would be.
Got it.
And then I think we both started laying down demos. So I would lay them down on the Mac, Matt would lay them down on his iPad and send them to each other.
Yep.
And then we set aside time. We actually took time off from work to start recording, and it took longer than we thought it would because we were figuring it out. But we got.
Yeah, I mean, I just use iPad, iPhone.
Yeah.
Send stuff through. I'll send John lyrics. Just email him lyrics.
Yep.
One of the key things about our musical relationship is that it's challenged by life, by work, and schedules.
Yep.
And so it can be really stoppy and starty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we're constantly talking about a more virtual way to do this, through the cloud and stuff like that. But that's really not as fun.
Yeah.
You know?
So you guys, it sounds like you're working almost, I don't want to say independently, but you guys will work on snippets and then share and then come together and start to piece things together, it sounds like?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least sometimes maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we took a week off last year, a whole week to work together
That's
on
awesome.
new stuff, which hopefully will be bubbling up.
That's gotta be fun.
soon.
Yeah, and that was one of my next questions for you guys too. Is right. So all three of us we're not necessarily working creatives in the sense that we're artists and stuff, but we all have jobs that involve creativity, right, in some shape or form. One of the challenges I have as a writer is balancing out kind of the professional responsibilities when it does tap into creative aspects of your personality and who you are. And then also, to your point, Matt, making time for this kind of stuff, which is really, really daunting. Talk a little bit about what that's like, and, because you had alluded to that a little bit, Matt, or started to go down that path of what that's like for you guys, and how do you achieve that balance or make sure you make time for that?
I'm very privileged at work I write, I produce content, which does draw upon creative energy. So I think that, gosh, I mean, for me, I don't really feel as though this is in the same ballpark as what I do at work.
Right.
Because it's strictly musical. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get that. Having been a professional writer and then trying to write fiction in the exact same, or doing the same craft, professionally and personally, that's a whole other ballpark, right?
Yeah, I think that's important because I find it almost impossible to write at home because I write most of the time, half the day I'm writing, not always creative copy, just copy.
Sure.
And then I can't write at home, but I can pick up a guitar and strum it, or I can write a poem, or I can play a drum.
I wish I was disciplined enough to just play every day, because when I do, I generally get ideas, which is great.
Yep.
But you are tired at the end of the day after working all day, and I also have some creative aspects to my job, so that kind of takes a little part of that away.
Yep.
But I find I'll get inspiration a lot. It'll come in waves, and to me it comes a lot with dreams for some reason. So I'll dream, get an idea, and try to get it down.
So you'll get music in your dreams?
I do.
You're able to jot down? That's awesome.
And I just try to be open to that when it comes. I'll try to get the idea down, which is difficult. It's sort of like remembering a dream, which you feel is very vivid at the time, and then...
So you keep the phone beside the bed and you just record it into the phone? What do you do?
Sometimes I don't really do the phone, but sometimes I just try to keep that I can record something on some means, computer or whatever. Yeah. Actually, I have done it on the phone.
Yeah, just curious. Yeah. There have been times in my life, especially when I was doing a lot of creative writing, much more so than I do now. Back when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I used to keep a little micro cassette recorder in the Jeep.
Yeah.
And so literally I'd be sitting in traffic, right? You'd be driving and the engine's going and the wheels are turning in your head, and all of a sudden, boom, you'd get this idea, and I'd have to grab the tape recorder and dictate to myself, just because you can't sit down and write something in the car.
Yeah.
And to me, I love those moments. I feel like that's kind of the creative impulse that you get. And it's you want to embrace those, but then you have to kind of capture enough to actually do the work later on.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know about you guys, but I know that's when I'm really firing on all cylinders, because you get a lot of those moments.
Me too. Yeah.
So we talked about your process. We talked a little about how you guys came together. I'm curious to know what you guys are working on now.
So we have a bunch of songs that we started noodling last year, actually, when we took that time off. And so we need to polish that, revisit that.
I think we have about 7, and it's not like we were kind of showing the songs to each other and recording them all at the same time.
Okay.
So if it was an ideal world and we could just hang out at the studio all day, this would have been done a long time ago.
Sure. Right.
But it's sort of we didn't come in with these completely finished songs.
Right.
Some things either they don't have lyrics yet, or they don't have a full arrangement.
I think something we've been talking about too is doing, just for fun, doing genre. Pick what we were saying, any type of genre, like ragtime or whatever, and just write to the genre and kind of fit it in as a fun exercise, as a creative exercise. I think we've been talking too about doing A-sides and B-sides. Moonlight Vermont and Brown Eyed Girl, for example, fantastic songs. Maybe pick one of those or both just as an illustration, cover it, and then do something that's either inspired by it or derivative of it, perhaps, just to get our juices flowing. Because I think sometimes what happens with us is we need a warm-up period every time we get together to to do serious recording, it's like, how do we ride this bike again?
Yeah.
It's not like riding a bike.
Right.
I don't play every day, and so sometimes like my wrists will hurt when I play the drums for a couple hours,
right?
Because I'm not in shape anymore for playing.
Yeah.
So how's that?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we're tracking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems lately.
Well, I would also imagine it might be a little bit different collaboratively too, right? Because I've always worked, my writing has always been solo. It's a very solo kind of process. It's got to be different working as a team and working together too. Because, right, everybody grows, everybody evolves. Certainly for me, I'm not writing the same types of stuff that I wrote in my 20s or my 30s. I would think for you guys as musicians, that kind of evolves as well. So it feels like every time bands or musicians get together, you bring a little something different to the table because you guys have evolved as people and as creative individuals.
It's kind of strange. I don't know if it's part of being older, but I remember in prior bands I was very opinionated. Like I wanted to be this certain kind of music or whatever.
Yeah.
And this collaboration with Matt has been very balanced. And there were points where he would bring in an idea, like Inception on our EP. I remember when you wanted to do acoustic guitar, and I thought, this isn't an acoustic guitar kind of song. And I was like, okay, go ahead, record it. And I was like, this is great. Like, it really worked really well with it.
Right.
And that's kind of been the trend. And now I've learned to just kind of be open. And generally, that collaboration is what makes it good, because you're each bringing the different perspective, and it's not all from one viewpoint.
And do you think it pushes you more than you would individually?
I think so.
My eureka moment working with John was on a song called End of the Day. Among many other things, John laid down a guitar solo, an outro solo, and I still listen to it. And I just realized I could never have done that. I could never have created that beautiful outro. Ever. And on another level, that song and all of what we're doing, I could never have done alone. For practical reasons and for personal reasons. And again, correct me, John, I don't think we could have done this, either of us, alone.
No.
Yeah,
definitely is.
Yeah, so we could only do it together. And so I think, therefore, when people say who does what, who writes what, I honestly say we both do.
Yeah.
We really both create these songs together.
Because, for example, that guitar outro, Matt kind of described what he wanted, and then I tried to come up with something. So it wasn't like I just did it on my own.
But it is wonderful. It's wonderful because, again, when I was a kid in bands, and I pushed my songs, I pushed my lyrics, my melodies, whatever. And if there was any compromise, I was sullen.
Right.
Yeah.
And I hate to use this word, but synergy.
I
think it applies.
Yeah.
I think it applies here.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I have always felt, right, and we've all seen this professionally, even when you're doing any kind of creative work, there's something good that comes out of a little bit of conflict or a little bit of different points of view.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants to hear something where everybody's kind of thinking the same way. That groupthink just doesn't really work well. So it's interesting to see that being part of the process and kind of that exploration, that test and learn kind of approach.
Yeah, and I think John's also quite a brilliant producer, honestly. Taking the musical aspect out, I think, John, you're just very good at producing. I think it's obvious he's an encyclopedia of music.
It's awesome.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And I really just come over and have luxury of worrying about just having fun in the sandbox, and you handle like the engineering and stuff. It's fantastic.
But Matt is a great songwriter, so he has a lot of the ideas, the lyrics. I don't have any strength in that area, and musically as well, and with the arrangements too. So I kind of get it down, and then maybe I come up with ideas that hopefully enhance it. Yeah. But it's synergy, definitely balance between our skills.
Yeah, John's really skillful in vocal arrangements. Yeah, you're really good at layering voices. He'll kind of like mark if I happen to, we both sing, but if I happen to be singing a part, John will kind of like sing it to say this is what I'm looking for.
Right.
And then when everything comes together, I'm like, wow, I don't know how you see that in your mind. Yeah. With these multiple vocal parts, but that's fantastic. That's awesome.
When we first said we were in a band together, and people who knew both of us would always say, "Who sings?"
Because neither one of you consider yourselves a singer, right?
No, I don't know if or like that our spoken voices don't sound like we would be singers. I don't know what. Yeah, we're kind of reluctant singers.
Singing's a very weird thing. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm a drummer.
Yeah.
Everything
But there are
else,
drummers who sing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm a
You know.
drummer. Everything else is whatever it is. But
Right,
yeah, no,
right,
I'm
right.
not a singer.
Yeah. It's
Not a
very-
singer, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up singing, and there was a point when I started college, before I started writing, that I thought I was going to go into music, and I got out of it. And I had the interesting take of, I grew up singing, but never learned any of the instruments and never had that stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, it was never a big deal, but yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, I'm not gonna make a living at this, and I don't. By the time I realized I needed to play an instrument, I was too far along. You know what I mean? It was like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna catch up at this point.
Yeah.
So
I kind of
that's
think
cool.
there's a reason why the singers are always the focus of attention, though, because they're
narcissistic.
well,
And
like
I'll say that as a former performer. I get it.
I think they're putting their full selves out there, like your voice. There's nothing more
Yeah.
personal than that.
Right.
And you know, like to play a guitar lick or whatever. I think like the band always resents the singer usually, but I don't know. I think it's you're putting the most personal part of yourself out
Yeah,
there.
I can't stand my own voice.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody does. I listen
I
to
don't
these
like
and I'm
mine.
like, nah, I don't. Do I really sound like that?
Yeah.
It's not.
But playing a guitar solo, you hear and you're like, yeah, that's me.
But you put a lot of yourself into that too, right? I mean, there
it's
is kind of
different.
that. I don't want to plant a seed, right? But I mean, you know, there's that when you think when you're younger about when you create something new for the first time, of whether or not people are going to like it or not like it, and all that stuff that we get wrapped up in when we're younger. I think that's true of musicians, and certainly right for you, Matt, as a songwriter. Depending on how well or what path you go down as a songwriter and how much that reflects your own experiences in your life, that's certainly opens yourself up for critique and analysis as well.
Oh yeah, and you know, you figure how much do you mask what you're writing, so that I find in lyrics I'm writing about personal things, some things are from the past. For some reason I seem to write a lot about regret. You know, do you share that? I think yes. Do you kind of like put code around it, so that your family and friends don't know
Right.
that they may be part of that regret? Yeah. When all said and done, I think you just share it. And again, we're not in a popularity contest anymore.
Right.
You know,
Right.
we're just we're grown men, and it is what it is. Yeah.
Part of the process.
Yeah.
Part of the autistic process, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I like to ask a lot of people is, what one big piece of advice do you have for other people that are creative, or people that are becoming creatives who might be kind of earlier on in their journey? Or
I'd probably say, if you love your craft,
yeah,
then spend all of your time on your craft and not trying to get famous
okay,
or trying to get successful. Because if that's what you want, don't waste so much time on your craft. That's a whole other career, I think now.
yeah,
But not to say that folks that become famous or successful or whatever aren't brilliant musicians, singers.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's an intersection there,
Yeah.
but don't worry about that.
it takes
Yeah.
just as much energy and time to kind of do that as it does to actually truly be
Yeah.
an artist and work on your art, I think.
Yeah, because I think when I was a kid, it felt like that part of it felt mercenary.
Yep.
I was in bands with kids, and they were just all about booking gigs and going up the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the local ladder, metropolitan ladder, whatever it was.
Right.
I never really dug that. That's a whole other skill set.
Yeah, I would just say be true to yourself and, like you said, put yourself into your craft.
I think one thing about getting older too is that you know that nobody really cares. When you're a kid, you're like you think everyone's noticing what you do.
Yep.
And maybe now more so, but
You're hypersensitive.
yeah, kind of
Yeah.
hypersensitive to criticism.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say this to my younger self. Be blunt with your feelings, and don't write music to try to please anybody else and or market to someone. Or
Some of those things you can't, like you could tell your children that, and
Right.
they still maybe
They
wouldn't
have to learn it for
necessarily
themselves.
get it.
Yeah.
I'd say too.
Maybe they would. I don't know.
I'd say too. Practice.
Yeah.
Practice your craft. Dedicate time. Dedicate work to it.
Mm-hmm.
Be deliberate about it. It's very boring, but if you do love it, accept the fact that there's going to be times when you're practicing your craft that is mundane and boring, but keep it up. If you're a drummer, practice your paradiddles and work at it.
And enjoy that time, because you might never really get it again like that.
Yeah.
The time you have when you're young.
Yeah.
And get together and play with other kids.
Yeah.
Which I think we both did.
Yeah.
Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to share.
Yeah, play with
no,
others.
that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, that was my biggest fear as a young writer. My biggest fear was sharing a lot of that stuff. Yeah, and finding outlets to that. And I've always been in many ways kind of envious of musicians because there's just the whole music environment kind of necessitates working with others, and as a writer it's not always built in. So it's fortunate you guys have that.
I think too, as a writer too, when I was a young writer, I wanted people to think I was smart.
Right.
And when I was a young musician, I wanted people to think I was smart. I know now, that I'm just an average person.
We're all faking it.
Yeah. I'm an average person of average intelligence.
Yeah.
But as my dad would say, there's nothing average about average. So the key is to just tell your story, not trying to impress anybody, whether it's a writer or as a musician.
Yeah.
And there it is. Yep.
Very cool. Well, this has been great. I greatly appreciate it. Very insightful stuff. I'll wrap by asking you guys to share how folks can hear your music, how they can get in touch with you, because if people are listening to this and they're like, hey, I'd like to hear some of the stuff those guys have done, how do they track down your music? How do they find you?
We have a website, starchtossugar.com.
Mm-hmm.
Our EP is available on iTunes. On the website, there are some additional downloads, I believe, and we have a YouTube channel.
What's the YouTube
Phoenixville
channel?
Music Group.
Yeah, guys, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. Thank you
Alan.
for letting me into your home, John.
Thank you, Alan. I'll shake
This has
your
been
hand
awesome.
now.
We'll shake hands and make it official. Awesome. All right, thanks, guys, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks again to John and Matt for doing that. It's a great interview. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you guys did as well. It's interesting to hear their creative processes as two guys who have been working together for 6 years, but are certainly well established in their creative habits. So I definitely got some insight out of that. So again, the band's name is Starch to Sugar. You can find them on their website at starchtossugar.com. You can also find them on Facebook. If you go onto Facebook and look for the group Starch to Sugar, they have their own group page on there as well. While we're at it, let me just say that if you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor and rate us or write a review on iTunes or any other podcast directory. In fact, if you email me a screenshot of your review with your name and address, I'm more than happy to send you a few stickers as my way of saying thanks for that. Also, I want to remind everyone that you can find us all over the web. You can find us at headheartandhustle.com. You can find us on Twitter at headhearthustle. That's no E. You can find us on Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn and even Google+. I'll also give a shout out to my friend Meg Shearer, who designed the logo. If you're digging the logo, I really encourage you to check out Meg's work on Society6. You can also find her on Twitter at Meg's Art Tweet. And with that, I'll just say thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Now, go create something.